The deep space patrol fleet of the Zelkarian Empire moved through the void like a pack of metal predators hunting for prey. Admiral Kethver stood on the bridge of his flagship Dominion's Edge, his tall blue frame casting long shadows under the purple lighting that his species preferred. His crystalline implants glowed softly as they processed the endless stream of data from the ship's sensors. For 300 years, his people had ruled this section of the galaxy with an iron fist, and every species they encountered had either submitted or been destroyed. The sensor operator, a young Zelkarian named Vexelin, suddenly straightened at his station. His implants flashed brighter as new information flooded his neural interface. Admiral, we have an unknown contact bearing 27 Mark IV. Distance approximately 50,000 kilometers and closing slowly. Kethver moved to the holographic display that materialized in the center of the bridge. The image showed a vessel unlike anything in their vast database of known galactic civilizations. It was smaller than most warships, but had the unmistakable lines of a military vessel. The hull was a dull gray color with strange markings that their computers could not translate. Most unusual of all, it appeared to be drifting without power, tumbling slowly through space like a piece of debris. Run a full spectrum analysis? Kethver ordered. I want to know everything about that ship. What species built it, where it came from, and why it's in our territory? The bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency. The Zelkarian Empire had perfected the art of cataloging and conquering other species over the centuries. Every ship design, every weapon system, every piece of technology they encountered was studied, analyzed, and ultimately absorbed into their growing collection of conquered civilizations. This unknown vessel would be no different. Thousands of kilometers away. The human vessel Defiant drifted silently through space. Captain Jake Morrison lay unconscious in the ship's medical bay, his body covered in burns and cuts from the explosion that had torn through the bridge 3 days ago. The ship's warp drive had suffered a catastrophic failure during what should have been a routine patrol mission along the outer rim of human space. The blast had knocked out most of the ship's systems and left the crew with no choice but to enter emergency cryogenic sleep while the ship's artificial intelligence worked to keep them alive. The AI, which the crew had nicknamed Betty, monitored life support systems and maintained minimal power to essential functions. To any outside observer, the Defiant appeared to be a dead ship drifting through space. Betty had been programmed to maintain radio silence and avoid detection in case of emergency, so she made no attempt to signal for help. The AI calculated that the crew could survive in cryosleep for another 47 days before life support would begin to fail. Back on the Zelkarian flagship, the analysis of the unknown vessel was producing puzzling results. The ship's hull was made from materials that their databases claimed should not exist. The metal composition included elements that their scientists insisted were impossible to forge into stable alloys. The energy readings were almost non-existent, suggesting the ship was either dead or using some form of stealth technology beyond their understanding. Sir, the vessel appears to be in distress, reported the sensor operator. We're detecting minimal life signs aboard, but the signatures are unlike any species in our records. The atmospheric composition inside the ship is completely foreign to us. Kethver studied the readings with growing interest. In 3 centuries of conquest, the Empire had never encountered a species they could not identify within hours of first contact. Every civilization followed predictable patterns of technological development and biological evolution. This ship challenged everything they thought they knew about galactic life. Deploy boarding shuttles, he commanded. I want a full crew aboard that vessel within the hour. Capture any survivors and bring them back for questioning. If this is a new species, we need to understand their capabilities before they become a threat. The boarding party consisted of 12 elite Zelkarian warriors, each equipped with weapons that could punch through the armor of known galactic powers. They approached the drifting vessel with confidence born from centuries of successful conquests. The ship's hull showed signs of recent battle damage, but the technology visible through the gaps in the armor appeared crude and primitive compared to their own advanced systems. As they cut through the ship's outer hull, The boarding party discovered that the atmospheric composition inside was a mixture of gases that would be toxic to most known species. The gravity was set to levels that seemed impossibly high for any civilized race. The corridors were designed for beings much smaller than the tall Zelkarians, forcing them to crouch as they moved through the ship. They found the sleeping humans in the medical bay, 47 beings in strange cylindrical chambers filled with a clear liquid. The creatures were small by galactic standards, with pale skin and no visible technological implants. They appeared to be mammals, which was unusual since most advanced species had evolved beyond such primitive biological functions. Dr. Vextai, the Empire's leading expert on alien biology, examined the sleeping creatures with fascination. These beings seemed to represent everything that advanced civilizations had evolved away from. They had no natural armor, no enhanced cognitive implants, and their physiology appeared laughably fragile. Yet somehow they had developed space travel and built a warship that used materials the Empire's scientists claimed were impossible. In the deepest part of the ship, Lieutenant Susan Walsh began to stir in her cryo chamber. The ship's automated systems had detected foreign life forms aboard and were slowly beginning the emergency revival process for key personnel. As her body temperature gradually increased, her neural implants began to process the information Betty was feeding directly into her consciousness. The medical officer's eyes snapped open as she realized their situation. Aliens had boarded their ship and were examining her unconscious crew members. She forced herself to remain still and continue, breathing at the slow rate that would make her appear unconscious while her mind raced to formulate a plan. The boarding party continued their exploration, growing more confused with each discovery. The ship's technology appeared to be generations behind their own, yet it incorporated design principles that their computers could not understand. The weapon systems looked primitive but showed energy output readings that matched their most advanced battle cruisers. As they prepared to transport the sleeping creatures back to their ship, none of the Zelkarians noticed the slight change in the medical bay's lighting, or the almost imperceptible increase in the ship's power levels. Betty was awakening more of the crew, and the humans were about to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. Dr. Vextai stood in the Empire's most advanced laboratory, staring at the collection of materials and components they had removed from the alien vessel. The metal samples sat on examination tables under bright lights, their surface reflecting the purple glow in ways that made his implants ache. For 47 years he had studied the technology of conquered species, and every civilization followed predictable patterns of development. This was different. The hull fragments contained a mixture of iron, carbon, and trace elements that his computers insisted could not exist in stable form. According to Zelkarian physics, these materials should have broken down within hours of being forged. Yet here they were, not only stable but showing signs of incredible durability. The metal had absorbed direct hits from weapons that could destroy mountains, and the deepest scratches barely reached a quarter of the way through the hull. "Run the analysis again," he ordered his assistant, a young scientist named Kevlin, whose implants flickered with confusion. "There must be an error in our calculations." Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison slowly opened his eyes in the medical bay of the Zelkarian flagship. The bright lights made him squint, and the strange purple glow hurt his head. He tried to sit up but found his arms secured to the examination table with energy restraints that hummed softly. His mouth tasted like metal, and his body felt like he had been asleep for days. A tall blue figure approached him, speaking in a language that sounded like music mixed with the clicking of insects. Jake's training kicked in immediately. He had been briefed on first contact protocols, though those protocols assumed humans would be the ones doing the capturing. He forced his face to remain neutral and tried to appear confused and frightened. The translation device activated, and the alien's words became clear. "You are awake. Good. I am Commander Zektar of the Zelkarian Empire. You will answer my questions about your species and your technology." Jake blinked slowly and tilted his head, as if he did not understand. "Where am I?" he asked, making his voice sound weak and scared. "What happened to my ship?" Your vessel was found drifting in our territory. We rescued you and your crew from certain death. Now you will tell us about your people and where they can be found. Jake's mind raced. The aliens thought they had rescued him, which meant they had not detected the ship's true capabilities. More importantly, they were asking about his people as if they knew nothing about humans. This was impossible since humanity had been exploring space for over 2 centuries, but Jake decided to use their ignorance to his advantage. My people are peaceful, he said, coughing as if still recovering from his injuries. We come from a small world far from here. We were just exploring when our ship broke down. Back in the laboratory, Dr. Vextai was having his own problems. The weapon systems removed from the human ship appeared to be crude plasma cannons, the kind of technology most species developed within their first century of space travel. Yet the energy output readings made no sense. These primitive weapons could apparently generate more destructive force than the Empire's most advanced battlecruisers. Sir, the power couplings are unlike anything in our database, reported Kevlin. They appear to be made from simple copper wiring, but our tests show they can handle energy loads that would melt our most advanced conductors. Vextai examined the weapon components more closely. The human technology looked rough and unfinished compared to the smooth, elegant designs of advanced civilizations. Every surface was covered in what appeared to be maintenance access panels, as if the builders expected their equipment to break down frequently. This was the mark of a primitive society that had not yet learned to create reliable technology, yet somehow, these crude devices outperformed equipment that had taken the Empire centuries to develop. The plasma cannon's focusing array was made from materials that looked like simple glass and metal, but it could contain energy temperatures that would vaporize the Empire's most advanced containment systems. Chief Engineer Ryan Parker had been listening to the conversations between his captain and the alien commander through the ship's communication system. He was hidden in a maintenance shaft that the tall aliens had missed during their initial search of the human vessel. The shaft was too small for the Zalcarians to enter, but it was perfectly sized for a human to crawl through the ship's internal structure. Ryan had spent the last 6 hours quietly accessing the ship's computer systems and gathering information about their captors. What he learned both impressed and worried him. The Zalcarian Empire controlled 47 different species across hundreds of star systems. They had technology that was centuries ahead of humanity in some areas, yet they seemed completely baffled by basic human engineering. The alien computer systems were incredibly advanced, but also incredibly specialized. They could process vast amounts of data and perform complex calculations at speeds that made human computers look like pocket calculators. However, they were designed to work with predictable inputs and logical patterns. Human technology, with its emphasis on adaptability and field repair, confused their analysis programs. Ryan watched through the ship's cameras as the aliens tried to understand a simple human toolkit. The devices were designed to be used by human hands in cramped spaces where advanced technology might fail. Each tool could perform multiple functions and be modified for emergency repairs. The Zalcarian scientists treated each tool as if it were a separate piece of technology, completely missing the fact that they were designed to work together. Back in the interrogation room, Jake continued his performance as a confused and frightened survivor. The alien commander was asking detailed questions about human society, technology, and military capabilities. Jake fed him carefully crafted lies mixed with enough truth to seem believable. "Our weapons are very simple," Jake said, making his voice sound ashamed. "We do not have the advanced technology of your people. We use what we can find and hope it works." This was technically true. Human military doctrine emphasized adaptability and improvisation over advanced technology. Human weapons were designed to be maintained by soldiers in the field using whatever materials were available. This approach had served humanity well during their expansion into space, but it also meant their technology looked primitive compared to the elegant systems used by advanced civilizations. Commander Zektar made notes on his datapad, clearly pleased with what he was hearing. A primitive species with crude technology posed no threat to the Empire. They could be conquered easily or perhaps even recruited as a client race to provide manual labor for more advanced civilizations. "Tell me about your homeworld," the commander said. "How many of your people exist, and what defenses do they have?" Jake smiled weakly. "We call it Earth. It is a small world with simple people. I think there are maybe 3 billion of us, but I'm not sure. We have some ships for defense, but nothing like yours." The actual human population was closer to 12 billion, and Earth's defenses included orbital weapon platforms that could destroy incoming fleets. But Jake saw no reason to share this information with his captors. The longer they underestimated humanity, the better his chances of getting his crew home safely. In the laboratory, Dr. Vextai was reaching a troubling conclusion. The human technology was not just primitive, it was impossible. Their materials should not exist, their weapons should not work, and their ship should have fallen apart years ago. Yet somehow, this crude vessel had survived whatever battle had damaged it and continued to function with minimal power. The Empire's War Council would want answers, but Vextai was not sure he could provide them. These humans represented something new in the galaxy, something that did not follow the established rules of technological development. For the first time in his career, the Empire's leading scientist was truly confused. Meanwhile, in the hidden maintenance shaft, Ryan Parker continued his careful sabotage of the alien analysis equipment. If the Zelkarians wanted to understand human technology, he was going to make sure they learned all the wrong lessons. Navigator Lisa Chun woke up slowly in her cryochamber, her body still cold and stiff from the emergency sleep cycle. The ship's internal sensors showed her everything she needed to know through the neural interface that connected her to the Defiance computer systems. Aliens had boarded their vessel, her captain was being held prisoner, and their captors were trying to understand human technology. With about as much success as a fish trying to climb a tree, Lisa had always been good at staying calm under pressure, which was why she had been chosen as the ship's navigator. Her job required her to think clearly when space itself was trying to kill everyone aboard. Now she applied that same cool thinking to their current situation. The aliens were advanced but rigid in their approach to problems. They expected technology to work in predictable ways and could not understand the human tendency to make things work through pure stubbornness and creative problem-solving. She carefully began the process of waking up fully while maintaining the appearance of being unconscious. The aliens had placed monitoring devices on all the cryochambers, but the sensors were designed to detect the life signs of known species. Human biology was apparently different enough that the monitors were giving false readings. In the Zelkarian research facility, Dr. Vextai was preparing for another attempt to understand human weapons technology. The previous day's experiment had ended in disaster when they tried to fire a reverse-engineered human plasma cannon. The weapon had worked perfectly for exactly 3 seconds before exploding with enough force to destroy an entire section of the laboratory. Fortunately, no one had been seriously injured, but the incident had raised uncomfortable questions about human engineering principles. "Perhaps we should try a different approach," suggested his assistant Kevlin, whose implants still flickered with anxiety from the previous day's explosion. "Maybe we should focus on understanding how they build things rather than what they build." Vextai nodded thoughtfully. The human technology appeared to be designed by beings who expected their equipment to break down frequently and needed to fix it quickly under dangerous conditions. Every component could be removed and replaced using simple tools, and most systems had multiple backup methods of operation. It was the complete opposite of Zelkarian engineering, which focused on creating perfect systems that never needed maintenance. Meanwhile, Supreme Commander Talsith was reviewing the initial reports from the investigation team. The humans appeared to be a primitive species with crude technology and no significant military capabilities. Their homeworld was supposedly defended by a small fleet of outdated vessels, and their total population was barely 3 billion. By Empire standards, they were hardly worth the effort of conquest. However, something about the reports bothered him. In 300 years of expansion, The Empire had never encountered a species that could create materials their scientists claimed were impossible. Every civilization followed predictable patterns of technological development. Yet these humans seemed to have skipped several crucial steps while somehow achieving results that surpassed more advanced species. "Prepare a fleet for the human home world," he ordered his aide. "We will make contact with their leaders and offer them the choice of peaceful surrender or destruction. Given their primitive technology, they will likely choose to join the Empire rather than face annihilation." Back, on the human vessel, Lisa-chan had finished her careful awakening process and was now ready to begin her own mission. She had access to the ship's internal systems through hidden access panels that the aliens had missed during their search. The Zelkarians were tall beings who had focused their attention on the obvious control systems while ignoring the maintenance tunnels and emergency interfaces that humans used for repairs. She began by subtly altering the readings from the alien monitoring equipment. The devices were sophisticated but designed to work with known technology. Human systems used different principles and operated on different frequencies, which meant Lisa could introduce small changes that would not be detected by the alien sensors, but would gradually corrupt their data. The first thing she did was modify the atmospheric readings from the ship's interior. The aliens believed that humans breathed a toxic mixture of gases, but Lisa slowly adjusted the sensors to make it appear that the atmosphere was even more dangerous than they thought. If they believed humans could survive in conditions that would kill most known species, it would reinforce their assumption that humans were biologically different from other civilizations. Next, she began to interfere with their attempts to understand human computer systems. The Defiance computers used quantum processing cores that operated on principles the Empire had never encountered. Lisa introduced false data streams that would make the human systems appear more primitive than they actually were, while simultaneously making them seem impossible to replicate. Communications Officer Pete Johnson was the next crew member to wake up, though he remained in his cryo chamber to avoid detection. He had been listening to the ship's communication systems and had heard enough of the alien conversations to understand their situation. The Empire believed they had captured a primitive species, and Pete realized this misconception could be turned into an advantage. Using the ship's quantum entanglement beacon, Pete began composing a message to Earth. The beacon operated on principles that the aliens could not detect or understand, making it the perfect way to send intelligence back to human space. The message would appear to be random system diagnostics to anyone monitoring the ship's communications, but it would contain detailed information about the Empire's fleet positions, technology, and intentions. The message would take several hours to reach Earth due to the distance involved, but Pete knew that Admiral Helen Brooks and the Soul Defense Fleet would understand the implications immediately. The Empire was planning to attack Earth based on false information about human capabilities, and the human fleet would need to be ready for them. In the interrogation room, Captain Jake Morrison continued his performance as a confused and frightened survivor. Commander Zektar was asking more detailed questions about human society and military capabilities, clearly preparing for some kind of action against Earth. Jake fed him carefully crafted lies that painted humanity as a weak and divided species with outdated technology and no real military strength. "Our ships are very old," Jake said, making his voice sound ashamed. "Most of them were built many years ago and barely work. We have maybe 50 ships total, and most of those are used for carrying supplies between worlds." This was completely false. The human fleet consisted of over 200 modern warships, each equipped with advanced weapons and defensive systems. However, Jake saw no reason to give the aliens accurate information about humanity's true capabilities. Dr. Vextai was having his own problems with the human technology. Every time his team thought they understood how something worked, their tests would produce unexpected results. The human plasma cannon components appeared to be made from simple materials, but they could handle energy loads that should have destroyed them instantly. The ship's power systems looked primitive but were somehow more efficient than the Empire's most advanced reactors. Sir, I think we need to consider the possibility that these humans are not as primitive as they appear, Kevlin said quietly. Their technology does not follow any known principles, but it works better than it should. Vextai nodded slowly. He was beginning to reach the same conclusion. The humans might appear primitive, but they had developed solutions to problems that the Empire's best scientists had been working on for decades. Their crude-looking technology was actually elegant in its simplicity, designed to work under conditions that would disable more advanced systems. Lisa Chun completed her sabotage of the alien monitoring equipment and began phase 2 of her plan. She started to wake up other crew members using the ship's internal communication system, sending coded messages that would appear to be random system errors to the alien observers. Each crew member would wake up slowly and carefully, maintaining the appearance of being unconscious while they prepared for coordinated action. The Empire had made a crucial mistake in underestimating humanity. They had assumed that primitive appearance meant primitive capabilities, but humans had learned to make the most of whatever resources they had available. The Zelkarians were about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you do not take seriously. Security Chief Matt Williams had been awake for 2 hours, lying perfectly still in his cryochamber while he studied the alien guards through the ship's internal camera system. The Zelkarians were disciplined soldiers who followed strict patrol patterns and maintained constant communication with their command center. They were professional and well-trained, but they were also predictable in the way that only highly organized military forces could be. Matt had spent 15 years in human military service before joining the crew of the Defiant, and he had learned that predictability was a weakness that could be exploited. The aliens expected their enemies to behave in logical ways, to follow established patterns of resistance and surrender. They had no experience dealing with opponents who made up the rules as they went along. He began his escape by doing something that no Zelkarian would ever consider. Instead of trying to break out of his restraints, he simply relaxed his muscles and let his body temperature drop slightly. The alien monitoring equipment registered this as a sign that he was dying, which caused the automated systems to loosen his restraints to prevent injury. Matt immediately took advantage of this by slipping, his hands free and quietly rolling out of the chamber. The guard nearest to him was a young Zelkarian soldier whose implants were focused on the data streaming from the monitoring equipment. He never saw Matt coming until human hands wrapped around his throat and applied pressure to the nerve clusters that Lisa Chun had identified during her study of the alien anatomy. The guard dropped unconscious without making a sound. Matt quickly stripped the alien of his weapon and communication device, both of which were designed for beings much taller than humans. The weapon was too large for him to use effectively, but the communication device would allow him to monitor alien radio traffic and understand their movement patterns. He also took the guard's access card, which would allow him to move through secured areas of the ship. In the Empire's research facility, Dr. Vextai was making a disturbing discovery. The archived records he had requested from the Imperial Library contained references to a species called humans that dated back over 1,000 years. The records were fragmentary and had been dismissed as myths by previous generations of scholars, but the descriptions matched the creatures they had captured. According to the ancient texts, humans were a species that other civilizations had warned each other about. They were described as beings who could survive in impossible conditions, who turned every disadvantage into an advantage, and who never surrendered no matter how hopeless their situation became. The records called them the species that should not exist and suggested that they had been deliberately avoiding contact with the major galactic powers. Sir, these records suggest that humans are not a new species, Kevlin said nervously. They may have been hiding in the outer regions of the galaxy for centuries, developing their technology in secret. Vextai felt a chill run through his crystalline implants. If the ancient records were true, then the Empire had not discovered a primitive species to be conquered. They had stumbled upon something that other civilizations had been afraid to face. The research into human technology was also producing troubling results. The more they studied human weapons and equipment, The more they realized that everything was designed around the assumption that it would be used by beings who were constantly in danger. Human tools were built to work when damaged. Human weapons were designed to fire even when their targeting systems failed. And human computers could function even when most of their components were destroyed. This was not the technology of a peaceful species, as Captain Morrison had claimed. This was the technology of a species that lived in constant warfare and had learned to make their equipment work under the worst possible conditions. The Empire's perfect weapons and flawless systems were designed for controlled environments, where everything worked as expected. Human equipment was designed for chaos. Meanwhile, Pete Johnson had successfully transmitted his message to Earth using the quantum entanglement beacon. The message contained detailed information about the Empire's fleet strength, their technological capabilities, and their plans to attack Earth. More importantly, it contained his assessment that the aliens had seriously underestimated human capabilities and were planning their attack based on false information. The message would reach Admiral Helen Brooks within hours, and Pete knew that she would understand the implications immediately. The Empire was preparing to attack Earth with a force that they believed was overwhelming, but they had no idea what they were actually facing. Human ships were designed to fight against superior numbers and advanced technology, and the Soul Defense Fleet had been preparing for exactly this kind of situation for decades. Captain Morrison continued his deception in the interrogation room, but he could sense that Commander Zektar was becoming suspicious. The alien commander was asking more specific questions about human military doctrine and defensive capabilities, clearly preparing for some kind of military action. "Tell me about your people's fighting spirit," Zektar said. "When faced with superior force, do they surrender or do they fight uselessly until they are destroyed?" Morrison smiled weakly. "My people are not warriors. We prefer to talk and find peaceful solutions. If your ships appeared at our world, our leaders would probably surrender rather than see our people hurt." This was perhaps the biggest lie Morrison had told so far. Humans had never surrendered to anyone, and the idea of giving up without a fight was completely foreign to human nature. Every human child learned the stories of their ancestors who had fought impossible odds and won through sheer determination and creative thinking. Matt Williams had freed 3 more crew members and was now moving through the ship's maintenance tunnels with a small team of humans. They were using the same routes that the ship's designers had intended for emergency repairs, spaces too small for the tall Zalcarians to follow. The aliens had superior technology in greater numbers, but they were fighting on a human ship that had been designed by humans for human use. The rescue team moved silently through the ship's internal structure, using hand signals and whispered communications to coordinate their actions. They avoided the main corridors where the aliens maintained their patrols and instead used the network of maintenance shafts, emergency passages, and service tunnels that ran throughout the vessel. Each human they freed was given a simple mission: create confusion and chaos without directly confronting the aliens. They sabotaged monitoring equipment, introduced false data into computer systems, and created mechanical failures that would force the aliens to waste time and resources on repairs. The Zalcarians were used to dealing with direct threats, but they had no experience with the kind of subtle warfare that humans excelled at. Dr. Vextai was called to an emergency meeting with the Empire's War Council. The military leaders wanted to know why their scientists were having so much trouble understanding primitive human technology. The doctor found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to explain that the humans might not be as primitive as they appeared. "The technology appears crude, but it works in ways that our models cannot predict," he explained. "Their weapons are more powerful than they should be, their materials are stronger than physics allows, and their equipment continues to function even when it should be completely destroyed." Supreme Commander Talsith was not pleased with this report. The Empire's expansion had always been based on their technological superiority over other species. If the humans possessed technology that their scientists could not understand, it represented a potential threat to everything the Empire had built. "Accelerate the timeline for the attack on their home world," he ordered. If these humans are more dangerous than they appear, we need to eliminate them before they become a serious threat to our expansion. The War Council agreed to dispatch a fleet of 50 warships to Earth, enough firepower to destroy any known planetary defense system. They had no way of knowing that their entire plan was based on false information provided by a human captain who was playing a much deeper game than they realized. Back on the human vessel, the crew was slowly regaining control of their ship through a combination of technical sabotage and guerrilla warfare. The aliens still believed they were dealing with a primitive species, but they were beginning to realize that something was seriously wrong with their intelligence about human capabilities. The Empire was about to learn that the most dangerous enemy is not the one with the best weapons or the most advanced technology. The most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to follow the rules and makes up new ones as they go along. Admiral Helen Brooks stood in the command center of the Sol Defense Fleet headquarters, studying the message that had just arrived through the quantum entanglement beacon. The communication from Communications Officer Pete Johnson painted a clear picture of the situation. The Defiant was captured. The crew was being held by an alien empire. And that same empire was planning to attack Earth based on completely false information about human capabilities. Helen had commanded the Sol Defense Fleet for 8 years, and she had prepared for this exact scenario countless times. The fleet consisted of 12 battle cruisers and 36 destroyers, each equipped with the latest human technology and crewed by veterans who had trained for combat against superior numbers and advanced alien forces. The ships were designed to be fast, tough, and adaptable, capable of fighting in conditions that would disable more sophisticated vessels. "Signal all ships to prepare for immediate departure," she ordered her staff. "We're going to retrieve our people and show these aliens what humans are really capable of." The Sol Defense Fleet had been built around the assumption that humanity would eventually encounter hostile alien forces with superior technology. Every ship was equipped with weapons that could be manufactured and repaired in space, armor that could absorb tremendous damage and continue functioning, and computer systems that could adapt to unknown threats in real time. The fleet was not the largest or most advanced in the galaxy, but it was uniquely suited for the kind of warfare that humans excelled at. Meanwhile, on the Zelkarian flagship, Commander Zektar was beginning to suspect that his human prisoner was not telling him the complete truth. Captain Morrison's stories about human society and military capabilities were consistent, but they painted a picture of a species that seemed almost too weak to have developed space travel. The commander had interrogated members of dozens of conquered species, and even the most primitive civilizations had shown more military sophistication than the humans claimed to possess. "Tell me again about your ships," Zektar said, his implants flickering as he cross-referenced Morrison's statements with the data from the captured vessel. "You say they are old and barely functional, yet your ship survived whatever battle damaged it and continued operating for days without crew intervention?" Morrison maintained his confused and frightened expression, but internally he was pleased that his deception was working. The longer he could keep the aliens focused on false information, the more time his crew would have to execute their own plans, and the better prepared Earth would be for the coming attack. "Our ships are built to last," Morrison said with a weak smile. "They may be old, but they are very strong. We have to make them work for many years because we cannot afford to build new ones very often." This was actually true in a sense. Human ships were designed to operate for decades without major overhauls, and they were built to survive damage that would destroy more fragile vessels. However, Morrison was careful not to mention that this durability was the result of advanced engineering and materials science rather than simple construction techniques. Dr. Vextai was making disturbing discoveries in the Empire's historical archives. The more he researched the ancient references to humans, the more he realized that other civilizations had not just feared them but had actively avoided contact with them. The records suggested that several advanced species had encountered humans centuries ago and had chosen to retreat rather than engage in conflict. One particular document caught his attention. It was a warning message sent by the Cathmoran Republic. over 800 years ago, describing their brief encounter with human vessels near the galactic core. The message was fragmentary, but it contained a chilling description of human warfare tactics that bore no resemblance to anything the Empire had ever encountered. "They do not fight like civilized beings," the ancient message read. "They use chaos as a weapon and turn every disadvantage into an advantage. Their ships should not work, their weapons should not fire, and their tactics should not succeed. Yet they defeated our entire fleet using equipment that appeared to be held together with metal cables and hope." In the interrogation room, Chief, Medical Officer Susan Walsh was carefully waking up from her own cryo chamber. She had been monitoring the conversations between her captain and the alien commander, and she could tell that Morrison was walking a dangerous line between deception and discovery. The aliens were becoming suspicious, and it would not be long before they realized that humans were not the primitive species they appeared to be. Susan began her own subtle form of resistance by using her medical knowledge to understand alien physiology. The Zelkarians were tall, blue-skinned beings with crystalline implants that appeared to be integrated into their nervous systems. These implants were clearly advanced technology, but they also represented a potential weakness that could be exploited if necessary. Matt Williams and his rescue team had freed half the crew and were now preparing for the next phase of their operation. They had been sabotaging alien equipment throughout the ship, introducing failures and malfunctions that forced the Zelkarians to waste time and resources on repairs. The aliens were beginning to realize that their captives were not as helpless as they had initially appeared. The rescue team moved through the ship's maintenance tunnels with practiced efficiency, using the same techniques that human soldiers had developed for fighting in urban environments and confined spaces. They avoided direct confrontation with the alien guards while systematically disrupting their operations and communications. Pete Johnson had established a constant communication link with Earth, providing real-time intelligence about the Empire's movements and intentions. The quantum entanglement beacon allowed him to maintain contact across vast distances without the aliens being able to detect or intercept his messages. Earth's military commanders were receiving detailed information about alien fleet positions, weapon capabilities, and tactical doctrines. The Sol Defense Fleet was already moving toward the last known position of the Defiant, using faster-than-light travel technology that the Empire had dismissed as impossible. Human ships used a different approach to FTL travel than most galactic civilizations, relying on brute force engineering and massive power systems rather than elegant mathematical solutions. The result was ships that could travel faster and farther than their more sophisticated counterparts. Admiral Brooks studied the tactical situation as her fleet moved through space. The Empire was preparing to attack Earth with 50 warships, believing that they would face minimal resistance from a primitive species with outdated technology. They had no idea that they were walking into a trap that had been carefully prepared by beings who had spent centuries learning to fight against superior odds. The human approach to warfare was fundamentally different from what the Empire expected. Where other species relied on advanced technology and superior numbers, humans used creativity, adaptability, and sheer determination to overcome their enemies. Human weapons were designed to work when damaged. Human ships were built to fight when outnumbered. And human tactics were based on the principle that there was always a way to win if you were willing to think outside the established rules. Dr. Vextai was reaching a troubling conclusion about the humans and their technology. The more he studied their equipment, the more he realized that it was not primitive at all. It was simply designed according to principles that the Empire had never encountered. Human technology was optimized for reliability, repairability, and effectiveness under adverse conditions rather than elegance and sophistication. The Empire's weapons were works of art, perfectly designed and flawlessly constructed. Human weapons were tools of war, built to kill enemies and keep working no matter what happened to them. The difference in philosophy was becoming clear, and it suggested that the humans were not the peaceful species that Captain Morrison had described. Supreme Commander Talsith was growing impatient with the delays in understanding human technology. The War Council had decided to proceed with the attack on Earth regardless of what their scientists discovered about human capabilities. 50 warships should be more than enough to destroy any primitive civilization, and the Empire could study human technology at their leisure after the conquest was complete. The fleet that would attack Earth was already assembling, consisting of the Empire's most advanced vessels and most experienced commanders. They were confident that they would face minimal resistance from a species that appeared to have barely mastered basic space travel. The humans were about to teach them that appearances could be very deceiving. Back on the human vessel, the crew was preparing for the final phase of their escape plan. They had regained control of most of their ship's systems and were ready to show their captors what human technology could really do when operated by beings who understood how to use it properly. The Sol Defense Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Zelkarian patrol zone, their ships appearing on enemy sensors like ghosts materializing from the void. Admiral Helen Brooks stood on the bridge of her flagship, the destroyer Valiant, watching as the tactical display showed 50 alien vessels, arranged in perfect formation around what appeared to be a massive battle station. The Empire's fleet was impressive by any standard, but Helen had seen the intelligence reports and knew that their enemies were about to make a fatal mistake. The Zelkarian ships were works of art, sleek and elegant with smooth hulls that gleamed under the light of distant stars. They moved in precise formations that spoke of centuries of military tradition and technological superiority. Each vessel was larger than its human counterpart and bristled with weapons that could destroy planets. By every measure of conventional warfare, the Empire's fleet should have been unstoppable. The human ships looked crude and primitive in comparison. Their hulls were covered in armor plating that had been welded and re-welded countless times, giving them a patched and battered appearance that suggested they had been through many battles. Their weapons were simple energy cannons and missile tubes that appeared to be decades behind the elegant beam weapons of the Empire. To the Zelkarian commanders, the human fleet looked like a collection of scrap metal that had somehow learned to fly. Supreme Commander Talsith observed the approaching human vessels from his command ship and felt a mixture of disappointment and contempt. The intelligence reports had suggested that Earth's defenses would be minimal, but he had expected at least some show of advanced technology. These crude vessels looked like they had been built by a species that had barely mastered the basics of space travel. "Signal the human fleet to surrender," he ordered his communications officer. "Inform them that resistance is futile and that they will be destroyed if they do not comply immediately." Admiral Brooks received the alien message and smiled grimly. The Empire's commanders were so confident in their superiority that they were giving humanity a chance to surrender without a fight. It was exactly the kind of arrogance that she had hoped to encounter. "Signal all ships to assume combat formation," she ordered. "Prepare to engage the enemy on my command." The human fleet spread out into a loose formation that looked chaotic compared to the precise ranks of the Zelkarian vessels. The ships moved independently rather than in coordinated groups, each captain making decisions based on their own assessment of the tactical situation. To the aliens it looked like the humans had no idea how to conduct proper space warfare. Meanwhile, on the captured human vessel Defiant, Captain Jake Morrison's crew had completed their preparations for escape. Matt Williams and his team had freed all the surviving crew members and armed them with improvised weapons created from ship components. The aliens still believed they were dealing with primitive beings, but they were about to discover that humans could turn anything into a weapon when necessary. Lisa Chun had finished her sabotage of the alien monitoring systems and was now ready to activate the ship's main power systems. The Defiant had been operating on minimal power since the capture, but the ship's fusion reactors were still intact and ready to provide full power when needed. The aliens had no idea that their captives were sitting inside a fully functional warship. The space battle began with the Zelkarian fleet firing their advanced energy weapons at the approaching human vessels. The beams were powerful enough to cut through the armor of any known spacecraft, and the alien commanders expected to see the primitive human ships vaporized instantly. Instead, the crude-looking human vessels absorbed the hits and continued advancing, their patched armor glowing red-hot but holding together. The human ships responded with their own weapons, firing simple energy bolts and primitive missiles that should have been easily defeated by the Empire's advanced defensive systems. However, the human weapons were designed to work in ways that the alien computers could not predict. The energy bolts changed frequency randomly to penetrate shields, and the missiles used unpredictable flight paths that confused the automated defense systems. Dr. Vextai watched the battle from the research facility and felt a growing sense of dread. The human ships were fighting in ways that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They ignored formations, broke tactical conventions, and used weapons that worked through brute force rather than elegant engineering. Yet somehow they were holding their own against the Empire's most advanced fleet. Captain Morrison chose that moment to spring his trap. He activated a hidden communication device and sent a coded signal to his crew throughout the ship. Within seconds, the humans dropped their pretense of being helpless prisoners and began their coordinated assault on their captors, the Zalcarian guards, found themselves facing opponents who fought with improvised weapons and tactics that had never been seen before. The humans used maintenance tools as clubs, turned ship components into explosive devices, and fought with a ferocity that shocked their technologically superior enemies. The aliens had weapons that could destroy buildings, but they were useless against opponents who refused to fight in predictable ways. Matt Williams led the assault on the ship's command center, using ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels to approach from unexpected directions. The alien security systems were designed to detect frontal attacks, but they could not track enemies who moved through the ship's internal structure like ghosts. In space, the battle was reaching a crucial turning point. The human ships had absorbed tremendous damage but continued fighting with weapons that should have been destroyed hours ago. The Zalcarian fleet was beginning to realize that their enemies were not using normal technology or tactics. Every time they thought they understood how human weapons worked, the systems would change and adapt to new conditions. Admiral Brooks watched as one of her destroyers, the Courage, took a direct hit from an alien battlecruiser. The ship's hull cracked and atmosphere vented into space, but the crew sealed the breach and continued fighting. The Zalcarian commanders could not understand how a ship that was obviously dying could still be effective in combat. The human approach to warfare was based on the principle that nothing was ever truly destroyed until it stopped working completely. Human ships were designed to fight when damaged, human weapons were built to fire when broken, and human crews were trained to win when everything else had failed. Lisa Shun brought the Defiant's main systems online, and the ship's true capabilities became apparent for the first time. The vessel that had appeared to be a primitive wreck suddenly blazed with energy as its weapons charged and its engines roared to life. The aliens who had been studying human technology realized too late that they had been examining a sleeping giant. The tide of battle turned as the human fleet coordinated their attacks with the newly awakened Defiant. The aliens found themselves facing enemies who used chaos as a weapon and turned every disadvantage into an advantage. Their perfect formations crumbled under assault from opponents who refused to follow the established rules of warfare. Supreme Commander Talsith watched his fleet being systematically destroyed by vessels that should have been scrap metal. The humans were not just winning the battle, they were doing it with equipment that his scientists had dismissed as primitive junk. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Empire was facing an enemy that they could not understand or defeat. Admiral Brooks opened a communication channel to the alien fleet commander. Her message was simple and direct. "You found one of our ships? We found your entire fleet? Perhaps we should discuss terms." The Empire's greatest strength had always been their ability to predict and control other species through superior technology and firepower. The humans had just demonstrated that there were some things in the galaxy that could not be predicted or controlled. They had announced their presence not through conquest or submission, but through the simple act of being impossibly, defiantly human.